Thank you for the man here. This is my rebut to the rebuttal offered by From the Grave to the Flame Ministries in our ongoing argument. Is there empirical evidence, repeatable tests, and or logically coherent argument for the existence of God? Well, he has issues, it seems, with knowing what my rebuttal is and what my rebuttal is not. My analysis stands of the Kalam because it is a rule of logic that the superlative, and I'm going to say that word differently every time I say it, the superlative, I don't care how you say the word, everything is not allowed in logic unless you can show that that's true. You can't use the word always, never, everything, everywhere, etc. in logic unless it can be demonstrably demonstrated. That's just the rule in logic, independent of any analysis that I have to offer on the rest of the column. That is just the rules. And if you don't want to play by the rules, then you've lost the debate, period. As far as the universe goes, and why we can't continue to use the rule of causality is because, not just of logic, but because things, as we understand them, start to break down the farther back we go. So, somewhere in the region of this circle, physics as we understand them today don't function the way that we understand them anymore. They have different rules back then. So, to think that we can keep using the same rules is to just ignore what the science is telling us. And there's really no good reason to do that. So not only is it a problem within the rules of logic to say everything without proof of everything in that regards, it's also a problem in how the laws of physics came into being somewhere within this circle of events that are going on here. So causality as we understand it might not exist back then. During my opponent's closing remarks, if he can find a peer-reviewed scientific paper that shows that the law of causality still exists at Planck time, then great, I lost, but I learned something new. But I would say that his methodology for getting to that conclusion is still flawed. So this might be a case where the conclusion is true despite the methods used to get to it. But when we have an incoherent argument, one with one or more logical fallacies, we have to stay skeptical of the conclusion until you provide evidence or a test or a logically coherent argument that would compel us to look further. In this case, you're going to have to find at least one peer-reviewed scientific publication that shows that the law of causality absolutely still exists during Planck time. We can't go before Planck time, so that'd be the closest you could get to the beginning, quote-unquote, of the universe. And I put quotes around that because that's kind of not what scientists mean, but it just depends on things, and I don't want to get into that because it's cosmology, okay? But the method is flawed because the logic is flawed. The superlative everything cannot be applied in this way due to the rules of logic. The laws of physics as we understand them begin to break down the closer you get to Planck time. So, if it vanishes, if the law of causality vanishes, then we're done. There doesn't need to be a cause. If it's still constant, then fine, but you would need the evidence for that, which you didn't present. That would have been part of evidence for your argument, by the way, not for God. Because even if we grant that the universe needs a cause, that doesn't mean that the cause has to be anything at all resembling God, let alone God. It could be anything, it could be nothing, it could be the lobster original deity. My opponent goes after my examples, not the argument I made. And my points stand because of that error. Again, with the chicken and the egg example, it's not my argument, is referring to how things work now, not how they would work during the very early stages of the universe. As far as my opponent saying that I got his idea of God wrong, being timeless, when he meant that God is atemporal, it's irrelevant because you haven't even shown that God's a thing yet. So God could be timeless or atemporal or a catapult pancake. It's just all irrelevant as far as I care because you haven't given us empirical evidence, a repeatable test, or a logically coherent argument for your God in the first place. And then, if you want to say it's atemporal, well, then you'd have to give another argument that atemporal is a thing that is, and that a thing can be that. You didn't fix the Kalam cosmological argument. You didn't give us evidence 1 or 2. You didn't give us a logically coherent argument. Didn't give us empirical evidence 1 or 2. You didn't give us any of that. And unless and until you do, we're going to have to be skeptical of your conclusions. And if you don't, you've lost the argument. Now, my opponent has his closing remarks still, so perhaps he can summarize.